Brilliant.
I'm just going to explain the logistics of the groups that we're going to be going into quite shortly, and then I'm just going to do a kind of introduction to the kind of contemplative approach which I'm proposing for that time. The groups, if you need to be reminded, are in 6 different venues, 6 different, 5, until I feel my maths over. 5 different venues, and I'm hoping each of the first name is a member of the team. I hope they'll collect a candle and a saucer on the way to be placed in the middle of the group. And I'm hoping there's a smoker in every room. And if there isn't, there are a few matches around, or someone's a Boy Scout, they can rub a few books together or something. Or you can imagine the flame if you have to. The idea of the groups, most of the groups I think have 7 people in them, but some may have 6. The idea is that we take 5 minutes each for each in turn to be a focus of attention, okay? And so either the team member or some member of the group will need to take responsibility for time and just say when each 5 minutes is up so that we know to move the attention around. In the 5 minutes that's yours, I'm inviting you to just speak whatever you would like to speak, beginning with the words I am. And that could be I am knackered or I am whatever, but just share whatever you want. There will be no response. So this is a group of contemplative listening. Everyone is listening contemplatively and prayerfully, but it's not a discussion, it's not spiritual direction, it's simply holding each other together in silent prayer, receiving whatever they want to share about themselves or their life or the day or the weather or thoughts or feelings, doesn't matter. If you only want to speak for 30 seconds, that's fine. The next 4.5 minutes will simply be in silence, and the group will be holding you in prayer and attention going wherever it needs to go. And then whoever's keeping time will say that the 5 minutes is up, and then the next, you can just go around the circle, the next person, the attention moves to them. They begin the statement, I am, and share as much or as little as you want or are comfortable with. Into the silence, it's held in silence, and it falls into silence. Does that make sense? Am I clear about the full horror of what I'm proposing? Good. Well, we'll see how it goes. So, and what we'll do is we'll move off into the groups by about 8:15. One group's in here. So start whenever you're kind of gathered and organised, and that means some groups will take 35 minutes if they've got 7 people in them, some will take half an hour if they've got 6 in them. So some groups will finish, and it'll take 5 or 10 minutes to find some of our rooms, but some groups will finish about 9 or just before or whatever. So then for those who want this compline at 9:15, the bar should be clear by 9 o'clock. So for those, and the compline is in the other church above where we were previously.
And it's a good idea to go a few minutes early to find a book and somebody should help.
Great.
Fine.
So I just wanted to say a little bit about the background to contemplative listening, and in a sense in groups such as this I'm hesitant, but I am anyway, going to start on the notions of formation and training, because you might be kind of sick of the discussion about what's the difference between them. But if we step behind what educational theory has been, we have a notion of pedagogy, which has been traditionally in the West and in recent centuries focused on the mind. It's been focused on facts and on truth and what has needed to be communicated. But it is very much part of the Enlightenment project, and as one writer says, facts are like telescopes and men's wigs. They arrived in their present form in the 17th century, but they weren't around in that way before then. So education, as we've come to understand it, is something that needs to be taught. But the older understanding of education comes from the Greeks, and their understanding not of pedagogy, but of what was called paideia. And it's a notion of education as being about not communicating facts, but the culturing of the individual in values. In other words, in virtue. The role of education was to promote society and form individuals in the service of the wider and the common good. In other words, education was there to promote, to form, and to discipline the human understanding. And in my earlier session, I talked about the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. And he says, and I mentioned, it's not much knowledge that fills and satisfies the soul, but the intimate understanding and relish of the truth. In other words, the older notion of wisdom and understanding predates and undergirds the later perception of knowledge as being what it's about. And I want to talk a little bit about this paideia, and it of course flourished within Christianity, within monasticism, which I also talked about earlier. It was Cassiodorus who said, "It was the vast leisure of the cloister that educated and formed Europe in the first place." Now, one of the rather old-fashioned but interesting writers on education is Gerald Vann, and he says that culture and enculturation, the forming of individuals and the forming of society, is impossible without the contemplative attitude. And it's only with the contemplative aspect that education can once again include the necessary scale of values and address the whole person and not just the mind. And I quote here from him, "Education, in other words, must have as one of its primary objects to teach us how to stop, to teach us how to be still and to look, how to concentrate our gaze until things begin to reveal their mystery to us. Education must teach us to preserve and heighten our sense of wonder, which is the womb of poetry and philosophy alike. For otherwise, no matter what our book learning be, beauty and life will pass us by." Now, I think if we look at the discipline of theology in our country and in the West today, we can say that after years, even centuries in the wilderness, we are witnessing something of a reconciliation between paideia and pedagogy, between, if you like, the learning of the head and the wisdom of the heart. Theology is now being recast and retrieved from being seen as something that is purely academic and for the expert. Professor Mary Gray can say, "Theology is a journey that deconstructs our own narratives towards narratives of healing and transformation. Ultimately, theology is a homecoming." And that relates very much, I think, to what you were talking about earlier in the material we had before supper. James Allison, "We are all theologians now." And Lisa Ishwood from Winchester, "Theology is an act of love." Now, the life of prayer, of course, is also an act of love, and it seems to me must also be about the process of ongoing formation, a part, if you like, of paideia. But for the journey of formation to take place and truly witness to healing, to integration, and to reconciliation, or should I say perhaps love, truth, justice and mercy, still waiting to kiss, then I think if that is going to be true, then silence, the contemplative attitude and contemplative listening has to play its part. The vast leisure of the cloister may be impossible for most of us in our daily lives, but leisure, the time to sit, to speak, to listen, however brief, must, I think, be vital to our life and to our professional work. A couple of you I was talking to one over tea, one over supper, was saying when I led the examen in the earlier session, they were kind of close to sleep, and it reminded me that a priest once said to me, "The critical thing is that we give time to sit before God. It could be 5 minutes a day, half an hour a day, it could be an hour a day, it actually doesn't matter. The critical thing is we give that time for leisure with God. If we fall asleep, it's God's problem for not using it properly." So we move slowly to our groups for an experience of leisure together and contemplative silence. Thank you very much.